I'm Corinne Guimont, the Digital Scholarship Coordinator at Virginia Tech. I primarily work on supporting digital humanities projects and efforts, as well as open educational resources. In this presentation, I'm specifically thinking about the different pieces or components that go into large-scale digital humanities projects, and how we can or should ensure that the valuable information and research that comes out of these projects and project phases are shared together to ensure open access. But first, I want to give some background on myself. I've been working on digital humanities projects in some way, shape, or form since I was an undergraduate at Michigan State University, meaning that I've worked on pretty much every role of a DH project, from the grunt work like data entry that we tend to give undergraduates to more of an intern or project coordinator role as a graduate student, and then to a library support role, and now even a partner role. I've seen many projects succeed, but I've also seen many fail. And because of that, I feel that there's a lot of valuable information and data that could be created at one stage of the project that isn't available because the project didn't reach its full potential. So something I've observed over the years is that a lot of the projects typically follow some basic timeline. My colleague Andy Osier and I created this timeline shown above that we tend to see digital projects push through. With large-scale DH projects, this timeline can last years. The grants themselves are often typically around a 1 to 3 year period, and that doesn't include the pre-grant planning period or any of the work following the grant or any extension grants. And even then, the NIH advancement grants split the projects into 3 phases: level 1 for planning or prototyping, level 2 for development, and level 3 for expansion of the project, with the assumption that a project can go through each level within a project lifetime. So with that, you could be looking at nearly 10 years of work for one given project. Following that, and this timeline, my colleague and I came up with, if we think about each of these phases having their own shareable output, the project begins to break into pieces or different components that are shared alongside the final project or website. So, for example, the prototyping phase may result in organized data, planning documentation, or even the actual prototype of the final project. The incubation phase might result in a grant proposal or white paper or additional documentation or some form of the working site. The production phase might result in user feedback or a start of preservation like files or even further development of the site. And the archive itself might just be the archive data, the different components of the site, like the code or the data or images, media, anything like that, all in an archival format for people to access in the future. The result of each phase ends up building the project itself into being connected to the final project or tool. Shown here are some of the common components. The research data and or the media is what drives the project itself. The grant proposal provides the early planning and funding for the development of the project. Any articles may further explain the research behind the project, and any documentation or sustainability is what ultimately supports the project long term. But as I suggested, these projects typically happen in phases. A researcher would start with their data or media. They would then write a grant proposal to create a larger DH project site that is often seen as the final publication. The project site and research might generate articles or white papers, and it should definitely, hopefully, generate some documentation and a sustainability plan. But as a caveat to that, I did focus my master's degree in digital preservation, so I'm kind of biased there. But what we typically see is just the final project site. So as I mentioned earlier, what about the projects that don't receive funding to build that fancy site? What about the data and all those different components that led into what could have been a project that just didn't get the funding? After all, the NIH Office of Digital Humanities reported a 12% acceptance rates for DH Advancement Level 1 grants, with 16% for Level 2 and 15% for Level 3. So what if, in the spirit of open research, we publish the pieces of a project as each phase progresses to ensure the work is out there? Once the data is organized, we could share it publicly, publish the grant proposals, articles, white papers, and so on as they become available, and share any final documentation attached to all of this. We have the tools and this capability, like the Open Science Framework data, data or institutional repositories, and even GitHub. And then as the project continues to evolve through its different phases, we can link the various pieces and provide the full research process in the spirit of openness, ultimately publishing the work's portfolio of materials rather than one standalone project site. But outside of the funding challenges I outlined above, why is it important to do this? What if a project does reach its full potential? Should we still share those different components? Well, my most commonly used reason for pretty much everything is the hit by a bus scenario. If we ensure that the data is available, reproducible, preserved, then we're not relying on a handful of researchers to keep this data safe as the project progresses over the years. But then if we're also thinking of years, and we want to think of this in the best interest of an individual's career, or multiple individuals if it's a group, having multiple pieces over a 10-year period pointing to a larger project is more indicative of the work they've put in than a single line on their CV. So potentially sharing the citation for the data they shared, or the different articles or the white papers and all that, making sure that that's all included rather than just the final project website. So that's a great idea and all, but what am I doing to kind of test this out? I'm currently testing this with a new project called Social Networks in Georgia and Britain, or SNIGB as we've kind of nicknamed it. It's built off of a previous project, Lord Byron and His Times, by a professor in our Department of English, David Radcliffe. Radcliffe began decades ago with diaries and letters relating to Lord Byron by marking them up in TEI. In doing so, he began to collect records of individuals to Byron to see a larger social network. He went beyond the letters and diaries and started researching just key people from that time period. In the past couple of decades, he has collected over 30,000 records that could feasibly show how any given people are connected. For example, how is Jane Austen connected to Queen Victoria? He's even collected data on the lesser known people of that time period. Some key groups would be kind of the wives of key figures, or even household servants and stuff like that. It could really kind of show how everything is connected. If two wives are in a knitting club together, then how could that show some relationship in terms of their husband's work and how their husbands were connected? But as you can guess, this is a fairly big project, with our ultimate goal being to build an interactive social network that will allow users to explore the data in both its raw XML format as well as through visualizations and an interactive user interface. But as I pointed out, this could take years and years to build a site that's already based off of decades of research, and the funding to do so is not guaranteed. So for the short term, our goal is this: to organize and publish the raw XML files in a public Git repository, which should hopefully be done in the next 6 months. This will get the data off of one person's personal laptop and make it easier to share and preserve long term. Hopefully, with the data organized and available, other researchers can begin to build off of their work, off of this work. And as we continue to build the project, as we continue to build the project, we will link the pieces back together to share the full portfolio of work. The full portfolio will also ultimately show not just the work that David Radcliffe himself has done, but also the work that myself and fellow librarians that are on this team have put in as well. And I think it's really important to also highlight some of that stuff, which can be seen more so in the documentation or the grant proposal and all of that. So with that in mind, I encourage you all to consider the other pieces of these large-scale digital projects and how they can interlock or be shared together to present the full research process, and how we as publishers can share that research process over a multiple year period. Thank you.